Good morning, and welcome to this edition of Top of the Morning, the Totem Show. I'm Nate Slate, and it is my pleasure to be your host. I'm here this morning with Patrecia Hollis, my friend of many years. You may have heard of Pat Hollis as the editor of Field Artillery, professional journal for Army and Marine Field Artillerymen for 20 years. Pat's an award-winning journalist, including receiving the Katie Award and statue from the Dallas Press Club for her 2006 Best Magazine interview with Lieutenant General Sattler, a Marine commanding multinational forces in the Second Battle of Fallujah, Iraq. She was also the first woman to be inducted into the U.S. Field Artillery Hall of Fame in May of last year. But Pat is here today to talk about her book, Normandy to the Nazi Surrender, first-hand account of a P-47 Thunderbolt pilot that she co-authored with her father, Colonel Van Sladen. The book has been on Amazon since November 2020. Pat comes from a remarkable military family. Their love for each other and their country is heartwarming and inspirational. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sure you will enjoy the show. Good morning. I'm Nate Slate. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Top of the Morning, the Totem Show. And today we have a very special show and a very special guest. Actually, an old friend. We were just doing the math. We've known each other for quite a while. Pat Hollis. Now, if she looks familiar to you, she ought to. Now, Pat was the editor for the Field Artillery Journal 20 years. Did a wonderful job, won awards, got a lot of positive acclaim as well as she should have. Made herself a legend on Fort Sill. Retired, went to work in the community doing some wonderful things. Groups like Operation Homefront has helped a lot of people. And you might be aware that most recently she was inducted into the Field Artillery Association Hall of Fame, the first journalist to achieve that recognition. So Pat's done some wonderful things, but we're really not here today to talk about those things. Pat, with her dad, finished a book that her dad had started, Normandy to the Nazi Surrender. It's a remarkable book in so many ways. And you may say, well, you're friends with Pat, so you would naturally like her book. Well, okay, so I'm predisposed, I will admit that. But the book is remarkable because it really chronicles how the Air Force began. And many of you know, much of that began here at Fort Sill with the Army Air Corps. But we're going to talk about it more in depth. But how you start an Air Force with some primitive airplanes, it was an incredible challenge. The people, the personalities, just an amazing piece of history and an amazing accomplishment. But this book in so many ways most fascinated me about the family and how the family grew. The Weems family, we want to talk much more about that. And how that family was so very, very patriotic and so incredibly, everyone was in it during World War II. Everyone was so patriotic and working to take care of each other and the country. To me, that was a delight. Every aspect was that. But my first question to you, Pat, is, your relationship with your dad, what it must have been like to work with him on this book and to finish this book in his name.
Well, actually, I'm the reason he was writing the book. About 15 years before it was ever published, I said, Dad, you need to write a book. And he said, oh, I don't know. And I pushed him. And in fact, he began writing. As an editor, he would send me copies of it, and I'd go through it and fix it. And then I'd say, Dad, one time I said, here is a list of 12 stories that I've heard that are not in this rendition. And I need for you to add them. And I need more meat. For example, there's a section about an emergency starting system that is absolutely fascinating. It's so primitive. Yet in a grassy cow field in Panama, for a P-36 that would start, I mean, not in Panama, but in Central America going to Panama. And he had this whole system going on. I said, Dad, I've read that 3 times. I don't understand it. What about this, that, and the other, dot, the dot, the dot. And finally, he got it so that I understood it. Then I knew my readers would be able to understand. So we worked together for a long time like that.
Yeah, he was in his 70s, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and
he got his first computer at 73.
Yes.
And he called me up and he said, Penny, guess what? It has spell check. He was so excited.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing. Yes, your dad needs to read the book. He's an amazing personality. He really is. Tell us about him.
Well, first of all, he was a fabulous father. He was absolutely fabulous. Well, he was a risk taker, and the book will show all this. He's a risk taker, was a risk taker. He was an adventurer. He's still part of my life and never will be any other. It never will go away. And he was a character, complete and total character with a marvelous sense of humor. As a matter of fact, one of my little mantra things that I say to people who are buying the book, I say, if you don't laugh at least 3 times while you're reading this book, I'm giving you money back. Because he's such a character.
Yeah, there's so many little things pointed out. I mean, he was a magician. This comes up in the book and you think, what? You're a magician. And a tightrope walker?
Yes.
You know, I mean, you think, what possesses a person way back then to think we need to put a table across Main Street? I'd like to walk on. You know? I mean, there's so many things. Left-handed pitcher, obviously very good. It helped him get to go to college and have opportunities. So he was talented in many ways.
Well, the book actually connects him to Oklahoma quite a bit. Yeah. He ended up getting a scholarship during the Great Depression at Oklahoma City University, and he graduated in 1936. But before he graduated, I've got to preface this. I'm a huge OU fan. I have a daughter and a son-in-law who graduated from OU, and my husband got a master's degree there, so I'm a huge fan of OU. But my daddy, as the star pitcher for Oklahoma City University, 2 out of the 3 years beat Oklahoma University. So he was very proud of that because it was a good school to beat.
Well, yeah, that was the big time. He thought he might be a pro pitcher someday. So he was obviously very good.
Briefly, for the Cloverdales and Alabama, and he was again the 8th low. Now, that was in those days, that was next to the pros. It was the next step up to the pros.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about, his service in uniform, but, it really was very striking to me, his story about buzzing the Grand Canyon as they were going across.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that sounded like so much fun. Now, you could never do anything like that today.
Never.
But they were young. He got promoted 3 times in 11 months and went from second lieutenant to lieutenant colonel because they needed them and stepped up and did it. But he's still a very young man, and full of that.
And so when they discovered they were protecting Arizona after December 7th and Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor, and they were out there protecting the air routes. It was boring to fly those routes. But they discovered it. They got on the ground, just on the ground, flew over the Grand Canyon, it dropped away for a mile, and then it was a thrilling adventure. And then you would keep flying, and then you all of a sudden the ground would come back up to you. Mm-hmm. And they did that a number of times. However, one of their pilots plowed into the far side of the Grand Canyon, and so the losses that would be that no more. But
there were instances like that when you realize how young they were. You know, they were adventurous, they were having fun, and it was a very different time. He had an opportunity to buzz his hometown when he was flying.
He didn't just have an opportunity, he took an opportunity. He was the flight leader, and he was in a P-40, which was the hottest, newest fighter plane out there. And it was picking it up and it was the first lieutenant, picking it up, taking it down to Panama. He was in command of the 29th Squadron at that time, and his was one of the first ones to get those hot, new P-40s to protect Panama Canal. And he realized that Waverly, Tennessee, little bitty town in Tennessee, in the way out in rural country, hard to get to, was right under a leg in his journey to bring his P-40s. So he decided to buzz it. As he said, I put the number 2 Burble in charge and went down. Now there were like 1,500 people in Waverly at that time, so we're not a lot of people, but he said he came across the treetops, and all of Waverly came out, stood up, and looked. And hardly had seen real live airplanes before, never mind a P-40 Hollis fighter, and ripping the treetops all around him. So he didn't have fun. He always had fun. Well, most.
Yeah, been a very positive, and he obviously expected the best outcome always. And I thought, reading the book, that was part of the personality you would need to be a successful pilot back then. He says around 5 crash landings. And I'll let you talk about why with those old planes in a moment. But he had such a good attitude about that. I mean, that could have been very disturbing to some people. And, you know, he seemed to get up, knock the dust off, and think about what he learned there. You know, walk away and get ready to do it again. And that's a different person.
I think fighter pilots are a different breed anyway. But back then, we first started flying, and he was flying a PT-3, which is a pursuit trainer. Now, they were called pursuit airplanes, and then some point, even during World War II, they became fighters, named that. He took command of the 36 fighter group in Europe, but they had changed. It used to be a pursuit group. And so his first airplane that he flew and learned to fly on was a PT-3 by me.
Think about it.
Kite-like airplane with no brakes. It had no brakes because it was such a light little aircraft. And when it landed, the crew would come out, grab the wingtips, and move it over and park it. He had to go from that to fighter planes, and the United States was building just as hard and fast as it could to get those fighter planes with the kind of capabilities they needed, because Hitler was, in 1939, Hitler was rattling his sword and then in Europe, beginning his war. So.
Yeah. All fascinating. And I have to admit it, because of our relationship, I got a kid, so, you know, he's in World War II, and his second daughter is born, Patty. You know, I mean, he's talking, not thinking, said, her Pat Hollis.
Yes.
You know, and that I thought, you know, that was really sweet. And then when he described meeting you the first time, he gets home and get 11 months old, you know, and so he's, you know, so happy to see his wife, something he wants to boy can understand and see their kids. And especially seeing the child that you haven't met yet. He described how you were holding on to your mom's dress and peeking around her.
With my thumb in my back.
With that, he did, but he thought, and also with you that beautiful eyes. And, you know, so I could commiserate and think, well, how special that had to be to him. And I also thought, and that's our Pat Hollis he's talking about. You know, so that was all very, very sweet. And he talks about, you know, how he met your mom. That's Colonel Ellis' daughter, right?
Yes, Lieutenant Colonel Potts. World War I veteran, who actually retired in 1943. But at that time, he was in Panama, the deputy commander of infantry battalion. and they were scraping a combat post out of the jungles of Panama and in setting up the defense of Panama Canal Zone.
Yeah, yes, it's a wonderful story. I want to come back to the families, but before we do, let's talk a little bit about the tremendous challenge of standing up an Air Force. He worked very hard to get sustainment and logistics. And it was hard to mention where there was none. They had these old, antiquated, well, they may have been the most modern planes in the world, but to us now, they look, so, antiquated, so rough. That there was.
Watch the things he said out of this when he's going through training. He said just one little comment, which is very revealing. He says that as he is graduating from the advanced flying school at Kelly Field, Texas, he says, our manual said that there will no longer be any retractable landing gears in any of the airplanes because they cause it to have 23% more weight. Of course, that was obviously not what happened, and he said that first just to show they were antiquated.
Yeah. But he worked so hard to help develop the Air Force. And I thought it was significant. Those fighter bombers, they had to be so skilled.
Okay, well, one of the things that we need to mention right away is that this set of what amount to memoirs is that it's his first-hand account as a P-47 Thunderbolt pilot. And that was called a junkyard, a flying tank. It was a multi-role aircraft in the air, fully loaded and weighed 8 tons. And it had a tremendous amount of armor right underneath the pilot, what made it extremely survivable. There are pictures and data about P-47s crashing in Germany and literally breaking in half, and the pilots walking away. So anyway, so that was Dan's plane. That was the plane of the 36 fighter, the Flight 36 that he commanded while he was in Europe. And it was a plane he flew in northern France when he first landed in England and trained on it. It was brand new to the theater and brand new to him. And it's interesting because of all of the great fighters that were in World War II, the P-51, P-58, P-38, and the P-47. The P-47 was the only one that did everything. Fighter bomber, reconnaissance, close air support, dive bombing independently of escorting bombers. It could get into dogfights and in the air with the enemy. So I like to say that the P-47 was the great-grandfather of the F-35 that is now your multi-role fighter out there, because they were doing it all, and they were the only one of those fighters doing all of those missions.
Once again, I highly recommend the book to our viewers because, it is a personal journal with fathers.
Yes.
And the things you're talking about, those missions, and he describes it very well in the book, like you're there. And you get opportunity to see and feel what all that was like. The picture you had here of your dad, is that a 47?
Yes, he's standing, that's his command photo. He's standing beside a P-47 Cowley. And he was a lieutenant colonel. By the way, we talked about him. He promoted 3 ranks in 11 months. At age 29, he was a lieutenant colonel. At age 32, he was commanding a fighter group in combat in Europe. 32 years old.
Yeah. What was striking me there is how fast he was growing up.
He had no choice.
He's a young man. He loves to fly. It's exciting. The deal with the great talent. He's a kid.
He's a kid.
And it was, appreciate London, right? You don't understand this young man, but the progression you're describing, he had to grow up so fast. And in so many different ways. And you had to be able to lead a unit that did everything that you described. So it was, the leadership challenge of him keeping the respect and the order of all those other pilots. There's so many roads here we could go down for a long time, about.
Well, fighter pilots love what they're doing. They have to, or they wouldn't be able. It's a hang your butt out kind of job, and they know that, and it's in their blood.
Yeah. Speaking of blood, that's a great transition. So I was fascinated with the Wings family, the fighting Wings that had their own journal, Wings Anna, and there were some of the things that I'm thinking, I bet that influenced Pat to be a journalist, because you grew up in that. Another distinction I saw there, and I think is special to your family, I think so, that the members of the family writing letters home from the war were very explicit. Now, in my got a little combat experience, you would never, ever write home those kind of details. But
let me tell you what clue good. Lieutenant colonels were able to censor their own. And they were pretty good about it. They would say, well, I'm with the 11th Division, or I'm with this. And then their families could pretty much follow the 11th. Mm-hmm. They could do some of that. But they were probably more explicit but there was no system to that kind of intelligence gathering was not prominent in any way at that time.
Yeah. So I see that, but what I saw the Goose family is they were so in it together.
Totally.
At the end, they were so hardcore, tough Americans going to win the war, and that they were writing through a journal. I mean, when Bill sent on his letter about his experience, fascinating. There's some backstories here at the end.
Annexes.
And I thought that they were great ads, because by the time you finished the first part, you are interested in people, the characters. You're sharing some more history with backstories. But, Bill's story went right into Wings M.
Absolutely.
And so I saw there.
But that didn't happen until after the war was up. That when he was in Wings Anna, that, or right near the end of it. But everybody in home had the Victory Gardens. His aunt was putting out Wings Anna. Bill started it when he was my Uncle Bill started it, and when he was in Fort Leavenworth and kept it going, then he had to go to war, and so Docky shipped Wings, took it over, and then it went on, and it's still going on today. Wings Anna is the annual newsletter. It's not a newsletter. It's a tiny little magazine that comes out in support of and reporting on the Wings Educational Fund, which in 1939 my grandmother and her brothers and sisters started. And then in 1957, Uncle General, that's what they called him, he was a brigadier general, he was infantry. He was an assistant commandant under the infantry school. It was his job. He was a World War I vet. It was his job to get all those enlisted officers ready to go to war. He trained them. That was his primary job in life. But Uncle General died of cancer in the throat, fairly young, and he left. He had never married, so he was married to the Army. He was a West Point graduate. He just totally was married to the Army. And he left his estate to enrich the Wings Educational Fund, which is around today. It supports 3 different counties that the families have been involved in. And I sat on the Wings Educational Board for 17 years.
Yeah, yes, it's fascinating. And still going on today.
Yeah.
So, Pat, if you can, what is it like to be born into the Wings family? The fighting Wings, I try to get my head around that. didn't matter which way the family branched. They all were so tight, and they were all fighting weeds, and they were looking after each other, taking care of business. What was it like to be born into that thing?
Well, as I grew up, I had very famous relatives. I had, like my uncle, Van Horn Weems, was he came up with a wing system of navigation of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and and even he was called first flight into space. He trained the pilots in case all the systems failed, how they could triangulate with the stars and work with the stars and find out where they were and get back home. There's a section in the Smithsonian Museum System, Space and Navigation, Space and Airspace Museum. There's a whole section devoted to my Uncle Lang and his contributions to navigation. So I grew up with that. I grew up with General Officer. I grew up with all of these histories. And everybody who could, everybody of the age in the Weems-Sladen family was involved in the war. We even had USO entertainers. Mm-hmm. We had Ways and Wax, and we had a Whack in charge of all of the Whacks in London. So everybody was part of the war effort. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think, and I've heard a lot of stories with the British generation and how families got behind the war in the country. But I don't believe I've ever seen a family that is as striking as the Weems had.
Well, the Weems first came to the United States in 1690. And then the people that I am descended from left from Virginia and came down into Tennessee in 1620. And then the Sladens came in at 1720. The Sladens came in 1730. Both sides of those families have been part of it. I mean, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. Would you like me to talk about my grandfather who was a Confederate or my grandfather who was a Yankee? Mm-hmm. You know, on both sides of the war, any war he's fighting, they've been in it. And I knew that historically, so. And I always said to myself, well, my Weems side of the family came from Scotland. Now, there were some war fighters in there. And then they also descended from the Vikings. Oh, give me a break there. There are some war fighters there. And then my Sladen family comes from the Germanic tribes that the Romans couldn't conquer in Europe. All right. I have some serious warfighter blood in my veins.
And all kinds of patriotism. Now, make sure the audience can see your shirt. That's just your...
This is the Weems crest out of Scotland. And of course, my maiden name is Sladen. And so that's the Scottish lion. What does that tell you?
I think that's great. I'm so glad that you wore that today so appropriate to this discussion. You were obviously very close with your dad.
There.
You know, I mean, you've described him as a character, risk taker, inventor, but you've also described him as a wonderful father.
What?
You know, when you think of your dad, what's your fondest memory?
My father was intelligent, funny, very, very funny, fun to be around, and extremely supportive of his children. And he and his father before him were absolutely positive, absolutely determined that everybody would go to college. And they sacrificed quite a bit to do that. My father put 4 kids through college. He put 3 through master's degrees. My husband and I got ours on our own. And he put a daughter-in-law through college. So the future of the family, looking ahead, taking care of our own, and making sure that we are equipped for the future. That he was absolutely determined to see that this family thrived.
He's obviously a very loving
man.
Yeah. And what you say about your dad, he would be very proud of that. the things you said. It's so obvious you're so close with him, and having known you so long, it's obvious that he made his mark on you, the personality, and life in positive ways. So, another Mexico, can't believe without talking about Coronado's China.
So when Daddy was in Arizona, they built Linfield, which turned out to be the treating of fighter pilots. They call him the home of fighter pilots in World War II. Oh, by the way, Tom Lang, who is an F-16 pilot, actually went and got his training still, and he's a current one. He just retired. He actually got his training at Linfield, Arizona, and Dad literally went in there with tents and everything to do it. But they got to a point that it was still being built when Dad was there. And when they got to a point at which they were, and turned out 250, a whack, each whack, 250 pilots, and then it slowed down. And he actually had a 6-day week. So he began, he came, long story, and I won't go into it, but he gets in his possession a copy of the Lost Dutchman's gold line map that was supposed to be authentic. And it has a history of authenticity sounding, and it's never been sold. It's always been carefully passed from person to person for years. So he went in 3 times looking for gold. And we're talking the superstition bounds here. In their dry, in their wet season, they have a puddle that runs a little water. And I've got a picture when we went in there. We went in there.
Yeah, I want to talk.
Years later, yeah. I've got a picture of Dad getting scooping water out of one part and a coyote drinking out of the other and wild cows would come. They didn't care if we were there. That's their only source of water. It was dry and rugged, and he went in 3 times, and then he had to go to work. And so years later, he decided his family needed an adventure. And my uncle, retired Lieutenant Colonel Jerry Ellis, went with him, Air Force type, went with him. And about 8 of us went.
Yeah, in Pattelis.
And I went. And I had a gun on my hip, and I had horses, and we went in there, we followed the map, and we did not find it.
But you found some precious stones in it.
Well, gold can often be with a nice line, because it's igneous, nice line of quartz. And in the location we were in, I located a thick cropping of quartz, which very often is where you find gold with it, because they're both igneous. And anyway, we did not find the gold, but Daddy we fired for it. We found up the rocks, we did everything. It was a great adventure to mark our stake. And then he fired the Eastern Arizona with it, gave the coordinates and that we had that there, and he named it Patty's Fault, like a fault in the ground, not like I did something wrong, but a fault. And so he filed that. He spent some money to file. That was fun. We had grand time. I've never been dirtier in my life. We were in there 3 days, and there was no place to take a shower or even a mud bath because water was so scarce.
Yeah, I mean, so this is at the end of the book. It is not thinking how special was your dad had always been an adventurer. It's much later in his life. He gets an opportunity for another adventure. He gets to take his stay about it. And then all of you who loved him and loved an adventure got to go with him. And I thought, how appropriate that Patty found the perfect stone. And, you all made the claim. I just thought that was a great story. But before we finish up our visit, I want to give you an opportunity to say anything that you would like to our viewers about your book.
Well, I would like to say that this book is all in his voice. And even though he died in 96, I am my father's daughter. I could continue his voice with no problems. And after he died in 2018, I went to a family reunion. I got this shirt, and my niece came up to me and said, "Aunt Hattie, I have all these World War II letters, big box like this, more than 100. And she says, I don't want to throw them away. I don't know what to do. And I said, oh, you send them to me. So in 2018, I had the information to enrich what Dad had written because he'd gotten sick and could no longer continue to collaborate with me. And so I had new stories, I had enriched stories, I had even corrected stories time-wise, and sometimes I'll look, in one case, I'll look at you. And I had a lead for other things to include. And I had everything Dad ever had documentation. I had all of his graduation from Army Air Corps flying plane programs. I had trained in my office. That's why I'm doing like this. And I have his grade cards. I have his handwritten notes. I have his... he kept everything. My grandmother kept everything, so we continued that. So in 2018, I realized that 2020 was the 75th anniversary of World War II. I stopped everything. I quit going to luncheons. I just wired. And I became a writer to pull this together. And Dad would say, in February, we decided we need to do, February 1945, we decided to do this innovative way of bombing. It's in here, and I'm not going to tell you how that is. That's fascinating. That innovative way of bombing. And we needed to take out this dam on the Roer, R-O-E-R, not the Buena River. But I had no context of what that meant in World War II. So when you read this book, not only did I have to work with his stories, but I also had to do the research in World War II to tell you what was going on and why that dam was important and what happened and what it was going to do. So, and he goes through, he taught me, after he stayed on the Air Force, and after after World War II, he taught military history at West Point. And the reason they wanted him to teach it, a little skinny, is because he starts at the beginning of the war, 18 days after the invasion of Normandy. He lands on Utah Beach, and he is part of a tactical air command controlling and giving missions to up to 5 fighter groups as the Normandy invasion and the breakout of Normandy and the war really started for the Americans. It had been fought quite a while there. His job was to make sure that his job was to bring the U.S. Army Air Forces over into Europe and get them established. He then went. When he was commanding the 36th Fighter, he leapfrogged across France, part of that tactical air command. Then he took command of the 36th Fighter Group, and they got in at the clipped end of the Battle of the Bulge. It was at Bastogne. Saved there. They cleaned up and were written in a book, written up in a book at the bridgehead at Remagen. He was part of Operation Clarion, Operation Danae, Operation Varsity, and by the time the war ended, he was in Brunswick, Germany, just a few miles from where the Nazis actually surrendered. So his breadth and width of what happened in World War II with a fledgling Army Air Corps, only established in 1926. A fledgling Army Air Corps was covered pretty much everything. And so West Point chose him to do that. And he was a military history instructor for 3 years. And because he had the big picture, the whole real interim. Excuse me again. So, and I'm very proud of this. This book has been It is a reader's favorite is a professional book reading service. Gave it a 5-star rating, so I got a medallion. These are all built into the covers of the next reading. And then this is the American Book Fest. This book was a finalist in an American national, of course, the national military in the military history category. It was a finalist in that for 2021. And then this is the Chanticleer International Book Awards. International Book Awards. And it was a finalist in the military and frontline services. These are both nonfiction categories. I'm very proud of that. Been very pleased and surprised and happy with that. So, and it's done well. I looked it up for you on Amazon for yesterday. That's the best I could do. Well, it is running the top 15% in sales in the paperback, but Kindle has always done way better. In Kindle, it's in the top 2%. It's pretty much hovered right around, it has had some ups and downs, but it's pretty much it came online in Amazon in 2020, November 2020. Pretty much its entire history, that Kindle has been pretty close to the top 10%. And the other has done well. I'm pleased with that. I'm very pleased with that. My goal was to capture history, to write a book for my family, and to archive it. Oh my gosh. I sent it off to 20 different archival places. And of course, it's in the Humphreys County Museum, in Waverly, Tennessee. I have put it everywhere I thought it could be. That was my passion. Anything else is great.
It's just good. Yeah, thank you so much for being with us today, visiting and sharing. Congratulations on the book. What a wonderful tribute to the Fighting Reeves. I'm sure that all past and present Williams are very proud of you for pulling this off and capturing it. Well, for everyone, forever.
May I say one other thing? When Dad, after the war, just before Dad retired, he commanded the 4504th Missile Wing in Orlando, Florida. And he established the very first ever American intercontinental ballistic missile system school. And so I would just like to draw the distance he went. A biplane, kite-like aircraft with no brakes to establishing the ICBM school. He was part of not only the greatest generation, but he stayed on as part of the Air Force to make it the most advanced Air Force in history.
It's an amazing accomplishment. He saw so much and helped make so much positive change. It's a wonderful thing. So to our audience, I highly recommend this book. Yes, it's a great book about history, but it's also a great book about a wonderful family. So I encourage you to read this book. I think you'll enjoy it on many levels. Again, Pat, thanks so much.
Thank you
for joining us and being with us today. Great to see you again. And to our folks out there that follow the TOTM show, thank you for watching the show, and I look forward to visiting with you again soon. God bless. Top of the morning.